watched my previous video, then you know that May was supposed to be the month about rewriting a chapter a day from my fantasy novel that I've been working on since November 2023. Spoiler alert, it didn't go exactly as planned, and I experienced a lot of frustration because of that, despite the fact that ultimately at the end I was actually really happy with the progress that I had. During this process, I filmed a lot of different parts of the month, especially in the beginning. There's a big gap in the middle because I wasn't doing so well, both health-wise, mentally, and then with this challenge as well. And then at the end, when I kind of had a surge of motivation again, I started filming again. So because of this, the following vlog will be a little bit spotty in terms of coverage. I almost wasn't even going to try and make a video ultimately for this, not just because I didn't complete the challenge I set out for myself. I think failure in whatever terms, or not meeting the goals that we set, I think it's important to discuss what it looks like to not meet goals and what progress can look like in different ways. But then when I wasn't following through with the vlogging part of it either, that also kind of frustrated me, made me feel like, oh, maybe this wasn't even worth it. But ultimately, I do want to share the videos that I do have. Hopefully they're interesting to someone, helpful to someone going through what I was going through. If you have chronic illness, you are especially going to relate to this. I think that was a big part of why I struggled in May, but I think I would have struggled in May either way with the challenge that I had set out for myself, given that it was fairly ambitious. In this intro, I won't go into it too much more. I will let the video speak for itself, and then I'll check back in with you at the end to talk a little bit about my thoughts, about kind of reframing again why I did this and what my thought process was, why I still stand by doing it, even though I think I had two warring parts of me that knew what I was supposed to be getting out of it and what it was meant for, versus that crazy delusional part of me that tried to make it so much more than that in the beginning, and kind of set me up for a little bit of disappointment despite the fact that I was doing what I set out to do. I also will say that in the end of May, I had a week where my partner was going to be traveling for the latter half, and I was going to be alone. It was the last week of May, and because of that, I thought I was in a really good spot to do kind of a 20-hour non-consecutive write-a-thon, basically. So not 24 hours. I just was like, 20 hours, that works. And I knew that over the course of, I think, like 4 or 5 days, I could do that, and it would get me through a nice chunk of writing in that last week of May. That I don't know, it felt like a good goalpost. I was feeling good physically and mentally, and I was really motivated, and I thought that was a good goalpost for me. That is going to be its own separate video because I actually filmed it from start to finish, and I think that it'll be fun to watch that on its own. So apologies for that. But this video is still going to be generally about the month of May, and I'll talk more about my feelings overall about the challenge that I set for myself at the end. And then if you want more of the 20-hour challenge footage, I will hopefully have another video about that as well. Enjoy, keep an open mind, and I'll see you again in a little bit. So today is May 4th. 4 days into my write/rewrite and revise a chapter a day in May, I'm on the same chapter. Now, here's what I will say for myself is that I spent April 27th through 30th, like a 3-day migraine. So given that, May 1st, I was pretty chill with myself, and I was like, just, if you know, recovering from a migraine, post-migraine is almost just as tiring and crazy as the migraine itself. Not as much pain, but a lot of fatigue and just brain fog. So May 1st, May Day, I, gave myself a break. I did a little bit of writing, but I didn't worry about it too much. And I was like, starting full force May 2nd isn't too bad. It's fine. When you're chronically ill, you have to make exceptions for yourself while still trying to remain disciplined somehow. It's hard. But the problem with May 2nd and 3rd is just that I was wrong about this chapter that I thought I had. There's a reason that my revision stalled this chapter in the first place, right? The way that the character was written in this scene when I had first started writing the book is true to who I thought she was then. It's not as true to who she is now. But the events happening still kind of need to happen, or they're happening a bit differently. But her reactions and the way she handles it needs to be different because it's just not true to who she is. Honestly, I actually don't know why it's taking so long. I think the problem is that everything I'm writing is not coming out in what I feel like is her voice. It's different than the voice that was originally written in, which is right. That's we want that. Yet it's still not her voice. And I don't know. I'm like, what is going on? This does not sound like her. I probably spent a little bit too much time on the same little scene here, and I probably should just move on. And a big part of the reason why I set this challenge for myself was so that I could use this to force myself to move on when I did exactly what I needed to do. So revising to the extent that I can in a day, and then moving on and then saving the rest for later revisions, because problem with me and revising apparently is that I really do try to do everything at once. And yet I'm already failing with that. So this one scene I've rewritten 3 times in the past 2 days, and it's not what needs to happen. I just need it to make sense with the plot now and the structure. And yes, the character, but we're gonna stop with this today though. Today's May 4th. I'm going to finish this chapter and I'm going to do the next chapter. The thing is I think originally I thought this was going to be easy because I was like, oh, you know what? I need to cut a lot from both of those chapters and I need them to like be combined into one, and that'll be one less chapter, shorter, more concise. But I guess my instincts in the beginning to keep it as 2 chapters were right. Sometimes your instincts are right, even though, I don't know, because I am looking at this now and I'm like, no, this has to be 2 chapters. So I don't think I'm going to be cutting down that much in words from these 2 at least. And I had meant to cut a lot. I am cutting a lot, but I'm replacing it with other stuff that's important. But I'm hoping that'll save me word count later. We'll see. I'm gonna finish this chapter, finish the next chapter, which should be easier. It shouldn't be as much of an issue. That one was pretty, I mean, I have to rewrite it completely. What happens then in my previous draft is not what's gonna happen now, but it was so bare bones to begin with. I think that it's fine. I'm not gonna be fighting with like keeping my original instincts as much. It would be nice if I could do another one. That sounds ambitious. Wouldn't that be nice if I could do 3 chapters in one day to make up for these 3 days of one scene? That would be nice. I don't know if that will happen, but it's 1 p.m. Sunday. I would like to do some gardening, some digging, and go on a walk later and clean the house. And we can't do all of these things, can we? Could we? There is a wasp right there. Wish me luck. It is 5:55. I've been taking a break for a little bit from 1 until about 4? No, it was like 3. I think it was 3. Still, that's way too long that I spent finishing up that same chapter. And it's pretty bad. But what actually is supposed to happen in this plot is happening now in that chapter. And I will have to come back and make the chapter nicer at a different point. That's okay. Not all chapters will be made nice on this pass. This one just needed to make sense. I am going to go ahead and try to do one more chapter, at least the bare bones of it. Will not be digging in my garden today, but maybe I can still walk and make a dinner. We'll see. Oh my god. I actually forgot, honestly, that on top of this, I was supposed to be doing edits of previous chapters that I need to send to my critique group because I had looked back at them through this prep process and I was like, those need to be fixed before I send them to my critique partners. And I haven't done that. I was supposed to do that this weekend. Maybe I'll do that after dinner. We'll see. I'm acting like it's small edits. I don't think it is. I think it's large edits. I couldn't combine those 2 chapters was to at least combine the 2 scenes that I had in the first chapter that I was working on, that I've been working on. And it overall, that chapter was about 3,100 words, and I knew that the main scene could absorb the important elements of the other scene, and that wasn't going to be too hard to deal with. I did cut that other scene, and I did cut a lot of stuff that was unnecessary, but I had to change the plot a little bit. That was part of the issue with this chapter, and I had to add things. The new chapter's 3,500 words. I wanted it to be less, a lot less. So there's definitely a good amount of like random like info dumping that went in there because I was like, okay, this is not explained, all this stuff that's happening. But I told myself, you've spent 4 days on this chapter, you will not be editing it any further. It's basically a rewrite at this point, and first drafts mean you just write and you come back to it later on the next pass. No editing, not if you're going to be doing a chapter a day, supposedly, right? Anyways, I moved on to the other chapter that I had initially thought could be potentially combined to this chapter, but that's not true. It's totally a separate chapter. It's a whole new journey. So, and I had to rewrite that one basically from scratch because everything that happened before had to be completely different, and I knew that going in. But after feeling really bad about this other chapter for many days, I really loved the second chapter that I worked on. I had to revert to the first draft mindset of this is basically a rewrite, meaning what's important is that I get the words on the page. Not that they necessarily sound good or look good. Not every single detail has to be explained. I think since I've been so focused on trying to explain or make sure that the magical elements or any world building choices are easy to comprehend or that they're understood and communicated well in this draft and that they make sense and are cohesive throughout, because I've been so focused on that, when I've had to rewrite scenes like from scratch, basically. I've been really focused on that as well. Unfortunately, there's just only so much you can do when you're just drafting a new scene from scratch. And for me, the best way to get over some of that paralysis of knowing what's right, even when you have ideas and research and prep, is to just word vomit and get it out. I did not get to working in the garden or digging. I did do a walk. And I did make dinner, so I did that. I did not edit my chapters that I'm supposed to be sending to my critique group. And I said I was going to have that done by the weekend, and it's Monday. I'm done with work. I am going to go dig now. I'm going to dig so that I can plant more wildflowers. And then I will try and do another chapter. And then after that, I think this chapter should be shorter or less revision work and more editing. And then hopefully I have some time to work on the stuff that I need to send to my critique partners. To be fair, there's 4 of us and only 1 person has sent stuff yet. So that means 3 of us haven't. 3 of us are slackers, so I don't feel too bad just yet. But I do want to give everyone time to go over my stuff. Oh man, and it's May 5th. May 5th and 2 chapters done. Maybe 3 chapters done tonight. Myself out yesterday with the digging, so I didn't revise the chapter that I was planning on chronologically. Instead, I revised a chapter that I need to send to my critique group. I need to send more chapters than just that one, and I hadn't intended to spend the whole night on that chapter, but it was a little bit of a problematic chapter anyways, even though it's technically already been through this round of revisions. In terms of those revised chapters, it probably does the most telling instead of showing than any of the others. So I really wanted to address that a little bit, and even as I was reading through it, I was like, yeah, this exposition is not needed. It's the introduction to our third main character, her first POV. It's important to know some of these things, but the way it was being introduced, I think, was not helpful or effective for the scene or the introduction to her and her character arc. But we'll see what my critique partners think. Maybe they'll have questions that were potentially answered by the things I cut out. So I don't know. Today I dug again, but this time I also put soil down and some seeds down. And I'm tired, but it's earlier than when I stopped yesterday at 6:46. Luckily, I have leftover chili, so I don't have to make dinner at least. So what am I going to work on today writing-wise? Am I going to work on another one of the chapters my critique group needs? Or the chapter that I was supposed to rewrite yesterday? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe both. Sounds ambitious though. Probably too ambitious. I think I will read through my options and see what comes up. It's May 6th. 5 writing days have passed because today doesn't count yet. I haven't started. I've technically rewritten is what I'll say, because revised makes it sound more finished, more polished, and these are not polished. I've rewritten 2 chapters that I had intended on rewriting, and 1 chapter that I had not intended on rewriting, I revised a little bit. So technically it's 3 chapters in 5 days. Could be worse considering the migraine issue and getting off to kind of a rough start. So not horrible. See if we can add another one today. I'm gonna give myself some leeway and count any chapters, even if they're not the chapters I planned on rewriting. So even if it's only a chapter done for my critique group from my previously already revised portion of this manuscript, that's fine. We're gonna call it a win. All right, wish me luck. Yesterday, I did indeed have to focus entirely on getting pages to critique to my critique partners. Again, we had to do a little bit of a larger lift than usual. I had been working on 2 chapters already, and so I worked on the 3rd one last night, and then had to go through and just make sure it was all good to go, and I finally just sent it to them. So I did not work on a new chapter, but still technically it was a chapter a day that I revised. It's just one that's already been revised in this stage of my draft, but it's fine. I'm getting to this point where like Act 1 is like on revision 2.5, where the rest is on stage 1.5, trying to get it to 2. It's fine though, it happens. As I was switching back to focusing on the chapters that I had intended to focus on for today, I just got mad again about, I doubted some of the choices that I made in my planning stage. So the main issue that I was really focusing on, or that I really knew I needed to fix in between this draft and the last draft, is that for my main character, Char, her turning point decision at the end of Act 1, breaking into Act 2, led to the plot between then and the midpoint being heavily carried by the other main characters, and her kind of depending on what they could get for her, information-wise. And it didn't feel like it put a lot of agency in her hand, even if she was making a choice. And also, she's supposed to have, like, you know, cool dream powers. So I was like, why isn't that coming into play with how she's achieving these goals? I made some changes, and I'm like, oh, that's fine. I can move forward with a different look at that turning point, and with ways that still incorporates the relationship that I need her to have with these other characters, and what she wants to get from them in order to meet her goals, but where there's an element that she has to address kind of on her own too, or with others, but where she's leading the charge, so that she is doing something and really risking herself, because she wasn't putting herself very much at risk before, and that wasn't enough for me. She needed to have some more potential consequences to fear, right? There wasn't really another side to that choice, which, you know, that makes stakes confusing. It's not great. I knew it was an issue. The only thing is that the thing that I chose, the way that I had it framed, then, even though, again, this only really affects the plot between end of Act 1 and midpoint, it actually affects the whole plot. And it was creating a tone shift that was almost religious in nature. It was sounding like very much like a specific Christian parallel all of a sudden. And I was like, ooh, I'm not trying to do that. I'm also not trying to have a commentary. I have many commentaries, but that's not one of them that I was trying to have. And it just was muddying it. It was muddying what I was doing. So I was like, well, there's some language choices that I think I can use. Maybe change some wording so that it doesn't feel as close to that. But even then, I wasn't sure. And I still was having a little bit of an issue, because then all of a sudden I was like, it's not really compelling why the other characters are giving her what she wants. There's like a bargain that comes into play, and I was like, all of a sudden this bargain doesn't feel, I've made it stronger on her end, sort of. I've upped her stakes. I've made her choices more controversial, I guess, for her, but understandable to why she would choose what she chooses. But then his choice, I'm like, I don't know, with what I've done to upgrade his character arc a little bit, all of a sudden I'm not sure what's in it for him. So, I mean, I had an idea, but I was like, I don't know, that's not good enough. What's the choice he's making? What is he doing that's not just furthering her plot? What is he doing for him? So, anyways, it just is one of those things where, like, I'm rambling so bad, but it's one of those things where every choice you make to change something to make the plot or the character arcs more cohesive, more concise, or more efficient, every change you make then has to result in all these other changes, because everything flows together, right? I think I finally come up with something that will help keep the agency on both characters in that Act 2, break into 2 decision that they're making, while setting up this deal between them that unfortunately does not happen at the Act 2 break into 2 thing. I think it would be easier if it did, maybe. I've got something, I think, now that helps. I was like, oh my god, I figured it out, but then all of a sudden she had like 2 goals, so she was gonna achieve what he wanted to, but it's kind of the same goal, but we don't know that, and they don't know that. Oh my god. How do you talk about your book without talking about your book? Anyways, I did finish that chapter, only to then think it over again and come to this conclusion of a better way to kind of like change things. So I think I'm gonna give myself a break. I feel like I did a good job today. I think I'm gonna let myself, literally 5 minutes ago, maybe 10, I was freaking out about how I had no idea what to do. And now I'm like, oh, it's fine. I figured it out. Actually, I have a good plan forward. I'm feeling good about today. But anyways, I am. I am. And I do have a plan forward, I think. Just whether or not this plan will work when I think about something else in 2 days and then change my mind. I'm gonna let myself be content with what I came up with, I think, and then tomorrow I will add, I think, a little bit more to that chapter and start on the next chapter. It's only like a paragraph or a few lines here and there that I need to add to this chapter that I worked on today. And then tomorrow is from a different character, not involved with these two, sort of. It's from Francesca's point of view, and she's off doing things 14 months prior, so it has no bearing on what happened here, so I can just go straight into that. And hers is so much easier. Her storyline has not changed. Some of her internal motivations have changed and have become clearer, but her storyline is pretty much the same. I just need to make her scenes more efficient, I think, and work on the world building. She does have a pretty long chapter, I'm not gonna lie. The chapter that I have to work on for her tomorrow is 4,000 words, and it does not need to be. So the biggest goal is to cut it down and keep what's needed. It's supposed to be like the start of her fun and games, so. These are all the scenes, chapters that I worked on are supposed to be in the fun game section, and I'm over here like, but what if Act 2 break into 2 is wrong? Rain from June 15th because it's been 15 days since May, and I've not filmed my thoughts or any sort of conclusion to that challenge. One, because I burnt myself out a little bit at the end there. Two, again, I was struggling with whether or not I wanted to continue on with this video, given that I knew it was going to be pretty spotty, and also that I knew that my challenge had been somewhat overly ambitious. So here's what I want to say about that. I had been struggling with my revision. I had been working on revising the first draft of my fantasy novel that I started November 2023. I completed it in September 2024. And I had only really revised Act 1 by January or February maybe, in slow pieces. And that was fine, but even though I had all these notes about big picture changes and structural stuff that needed to happen, I was still taking it chapter by chapter, scene by scene, because I really felt like I needed to for some reason. And I kind of stand by that, at least for the first act. I was trying to set up a strong foundation, but that became really problematic when I got to Act 2, when so much needed to change, and I really needed to think harder about arcs and the world and how things connected. Anyone who has ever completed a first draft as a discovery writer and then come back to revise knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's just for whatever reason, while I understood what I needed to do, I was having a hard time doing it. I was making myself go really, really slow and focus on details that were not important yet. And I knew this, but I was still having a hard time. And so I thought by setting this challenge for myself, I would be forcing myself to be really fast about these chapter level, scene level edits that I was doing, kind of taking each day to change the big pieces that needed to change, to rewrite full sections in the barest form, not expecting them to be a complete version of that scene. In fact, they'd be new versions of that scene, edited even less than the old ones. I really wanted to force myself to move through that quickly so that I could come back later and fine-tune more and think it over again. But the problem was that no matter how much of that revision that I had done in March and April to help prepare me for that, I was still doing revisions based on a lot of these more minor details. And so I got into the writing and I was like, no. I honestly, I don't know how it's possible. I did so much prep for this, and I still realized that I had questions, big questions that I needed to answer. That issue, combined with the fact that I was having multiple days in the beginning of May where I could not write, I could not look at a screen because I was sick from migraines, whether that was due to allergies, work stress, or storm season, I don't know. Probably a combination of it all. If you're a migraine sufferer, you know. Plus, halfway through the month, or at the beginning of the month maybe, I had a family member hospitalized, close family member, and that was difficult to deal with. It lasted a few days and involved a lot of different moving parts. They're fine now, it's all okay, but that was stressful. So between that, my migraines, stress from work, and also having set a challenge, at least in my head, that was a little bit more ambitious than what it maybe needed to be, I really struggled. I could not rewrite a chapter a day. I could rewrite a chapter every few days, but also, more importantly, that's not what I needed to do. At some point I realized that I needed to focus again on the character arcs, which I thought I had done before in my prep, but it was all notes. For whatever reason, things are not final for me when I put them in notes. They're not final. It's not final until I start writing dialogue, scenes, description, interiority related to these notes for character arcs or world building or plans. And so what was happening is I was getting into these scenes with these notes for character arcs to set me up for the changes in the book, and those ideas just weren't working. The ideas that I thought would work did not work. And so instead, at some point I realized, okay, just write straight through the arc. Forget the scenes, forget chapters, just write straight through the arcs, skip around and write what you think those pivotal moments in how these characters respond to things around them that you've planned, how that changes as the plot moves forward, as they move forward. Who do they become? What does their growth look like on the page in the scene? Because I can make all the notes I want about that, and I can try and take it scene by scene, but it just doesn't, it changes. It doesn't work until I am feeling them out in words. And that's how it's always been. That's why I really liked being a discovery writer, because outlining meant one story and then writing meant completely different. And so for me, it's just easier to get into the headspace for it that way. Ultimately, I did make a lot of progress. A lot of it was towards the end of the month, and after I kind of had this aha moment about the approach needed to kind of help me get through these humps, focusing on these internal arcs and streamlining my approach to that. Once I got to that point, I was able to progress a lot more. I was able to return to a lot of those earlier scenes and chapters that I wanted to work on and keep moving along again without feeling like I needed to stick around, or like without feeling like I was missing details, and without feeling stuck. The 20-hour challenge, mini challenge I set within the month at the end definitely helped. I also was blessed for a mostly migraine-free week/period during that time. You can learn more about that in that video and how that went. I didn't actually calculate or keep track of how much that I got done. I think I was at some point. I had like a little tally mark of chapters. Just trying not to focus on word count because it's really hard to care about during a revision. But I stopped keeping track at some point when I was like, ugh, this doesn't go anywhere. I felt like that the entire month, blah, blah, blah. I just was not. I kind of lost steam and keeping track. So I'm just looking through my Scrivener document now, eyeballing it. I'm going to count through the chapters that I have finished since setting this challenge. I haven't really written since May, so I'm gonna go ahead and count today. I won't count the one I wrote today and yesterday. Those are basically the ones I've worked on since. Important. I was going to count from all the chapters in Act 2 because that was my goal. However, during this May madness, as I think I will call it from now on, I realized I really needed to restructure my break into 2 beat, because I had something that where my character was offered or made a choice. For 2 of my 3 main characters, there were 2 sequential moments that happened one after another where it was almost like they're being offered choices to continue down this path and break into 2, and then it kind of happened again. It was a completely different scene, and both scenes plot-wise were necessary, but the outcome was that there were 2 separate choices being made, I think. It's hard to explain. Basically, I needed to flip them. I needed the second one to come sooner. I thought that was a better reason for both my main characters to make the choice that they made, and then the one that was initially going to be the break into 2 scene for both of them, I moved it so that it's instead heightening the stakes rather than being another trigger for making this choice in a repetitive sort of manner, if that makes sense. It felt redundant at first. What's happening in those different scenes needed to happen, I think. Anyway, so because of that, stuff that I worked on in June got pushed back into the Act 1 phase area, the Act 1 area, so I do want to kind of count that as my progress. And so if I go back to that... Hi friends, Future Rain cutting in here via voiceover. I spent a good amount of time in this clip rambling and going through my notes and my Scrivener stats just to come to the conclusion that I could not easily rely on word count to measure my progress here. Shocker. But based on Scrivener stats, it seems that it's about 23,000 words written in May. I could be double counting a few sections there though. All in all, I did get about 10 chapters rewritten, with a few of these chapters moved back to Act 1 and some Act 1 chapters moving up into this first part of Act 2. And then there were some previously revised scenes that were impacted by these structural changes that I then had to go and revise again. But Overall, at the end of May, I was about halfway through Act 2A, and in the beginning, I had wanted to rewrite all of Act 2 in May, Act 2A and Act 2B, but in May, I settled for the first half of Act 2A so that I could then finish Act 2A in June with about 5 to 6 more chapters, and hopefully make a lot of progress on Act 2B in July. Still a little bit insane, overall a lot more realistic in terms of goals than whatever delusional aspirations I had in April, where I wanted to rewrite every single chapter in Act 2 in May. But overall, happy with the progress that I made there, even if it was a bit hard to measure. I talk about this a lot in my mini challenge video, or I should be, but anything that is not writing and like moving from one chapter to the next feels like it's not progress, even though it is. So that's revision. Revision is progress. Thinking is progress. We are not going to fool ourselves into thinking otherwise here. Or I'm gonna try really hard not to, at least. Take with that what you will. I can't really rely on word count. I have more thoughts on how I feel overall with at the end of my mini challenge, since I felt really positive at the end of that one, and I recorded an outro much closer to the end of that when I was still kind of riding that high. In terms of how I feel now, I am motivated. I'm trying to be realistic, but also still trying to be firm with myself and some of these deadlines that I've set. It's hard when you have a chronic illness. It's hard when things pop up in your life. I try to stay away from anything that feels shame-based, just because it doesn't work. It's not good for you, and it's not gonna make the situation better. At the same time, it's hard. And there's also just frustration separate from shame. Completely without any shame, there's frustration. You want to do something and you can't. Other people can. Why can't you? Not even in a way where you are blaming yourself or being hard on yourself, but in a way where you just feel left out, you feel annoyed, you feel like you're missing out on time you could be spent doing what you like to do, especially when you only get so much because you're working full time or you have other responsibilities and things that you have to keep up with. I ultimately am happy with the progress I made in May. I am happy with myself for setting that challenge, even if it was ambitious, even if a bunch of things happened to make it not necessarily 30 chapters in a month. But a lot of progress happened. Progress that I'm really proud of. When I think about it in terms of how the story has changed, I'm really, really proud of how the story has changed just in that month. I think if I were to give a specific example that I feel comfortable sharing, I have so many instances of side characters where now I feel like they have complete arcs planned out in this revision draft in my notes, but also in the scenes that I've worked on so far. These characters no longer feel like they're just there to fill space or to be background for these main characters. They have their own stuff going on, their own drama, and it's really interesting, and I actually think it makes it feel a lot more lived in. I am happier to explore those characters as well. I'm happy with how that has worked out for them, and I hope that continues as I finish this first half of Act 2 and then move into the second half. I am going back and forth in my head about whether or not I feel like this will be easier for the second half of Act 2 or if it'll be much the same, a lot of having to stop and start and rethink things. Again, I do feel like solving a lot of these big internal battles with these characters and how their arc, not only how it looks, but how it translates onto the page. I think that will help. Again, I've written a lot of those important fragments already, and maybe they'll change a little bit, maybe they won't. Once we get past the midpoint, I do feel like the plot is a lot more solid in terms of what happens at the A level, which means I won't have to change as much, I hope. I can just focus on these character parts and the world building. There's still some structure stuff that I'm concerned about. It starts to move really fast once the midpoint happens, which is good. The story moves in a way that would pull a reader along. It pulls me along as a writer. It's just that because of that, there's so much development that needs to happen between characters in the first half of Act 2 so that things don't move too quickly for the characters in terms of relationships and just in ways that they would grow and choices that they need to make. They need to be ready to make those choices. It can't just be because the plot demands it. And that was a lot of the issue too. I'm like, okay, I only have so much space for these scenes. But once the midpoint happens, things start happening really fast, and these characters need to be ready to change with the times, if that makes sense. I needed to fix the setup for that in the first half of Act 2, but I also needed it to slow down a little bit after the midpoint. And I have some ideas for that, so I hope that works out. I keep going back and forth on scene order though, in the best way to do that. But I think that's gonna be the name of the game until I finish the final draft. So 3 POVs, 2 timelines, it's just how it is. All right, so TLDR. Sorry. Set out to do something, and I did do something, and I'm really happy with it, and hopefully this video will be the conclusion of that challenge I set for myself. It wasn't only to rewrite a chapter every day, it was to document my progress no matter the outcome. So I here I am doing that. I hope you enjoy. If you have thoughts or similar experiences you'd like to share, please do. I could use it, and I think others could use it as well. And if you're interested in this kind of content, documenting our progress, good and bad, you can like this video and you can follow my page, and hopefully I'll produce more. And hopefully I can keep you updated as I move forward on this revision. Thanks for watching.